Nashville Public Radio serves Middle Tennessee in many ways every day, including through this podcast. You can support it by leaving a review or rating, by telling a friend about it, or by contributing at WPLN.org/give.
This is the Nash Villager Podcast. It's November 11th, 2025, Veterans Day. On this day in 1921, exactly 3 years after an armistice ended World War I, the tomb of the unknown soldier was dedicated at Arlington National Cemetery. The unidentified man, who was killed in action in France, was laid to rest in a gravesite that had been prepared with a 2-inch layer of soil from the place where his body was found. In later years, the remains of unknown soldiers from each of our subsequent conflicts were added to the tomb, but efforts to determine who is buried there didn't end. As hallowed as the site is, it's still always much better to offer the closure to survivors of knowing where their loved one died and letting them have a properly marked gravesite to visit. And in fact, in 1998, DNA testing finally identified the Vietnam War soldier as an Air Force lieutenant named Michael Blassie. His body was returned to his family and reburied with military honors in his home state. I'm Nina Cardona, and this is your daily digest of what's happening around Middle Tennessee with historical context from Nashville Public Radio, WPLN News. Here in Middle Tennessee, we also have a grave to honor all of the unidentified dead of an earlier and quite bloody conflict. It contains the remains of a soldier killed in 1864 in the Battle of Franklin. Now, if you don't know the story of that Civil War battle, well, it was about as messy as it could be. For the Confederates, it was part of a last-ditch hope against hope kind of campaign. The particulars of how the fighting got started meant that it was an overnight battle of soldiers firing in the dark wherever they had seen the blast of another gun. And it wasn't out on the edge of town, in a field. The battle raged amidst people's houses as the residents hid in their root cellars. One witness described it as perfect confusion. When all was said and done, roughly 10,000 were dead, injured, or missing. Because of the location, efforts to preserve the battlefield as it was have been really complicated. Some pieces are set aside as historic sites, but other places where the fighting raged are once again normal parts of town with houses and businesses and parking lots. All of which I explain so that it's a little easier to understand why it was possible for the body of that battle's designated unknown soldier to be found in the way that it was. The man's bones were first discovered in 2009 by a road building crew. They were working on improvements to Columbia Pike when they unearthed bone fragments. Archaeologists were called in, and they found artifacts that made it very clear that this man was involved in the Civil War battle. There were buttons from a Union uniform and a mini ball, which was the kind of ammunition commonly used then. However, the particulars made it impossible to determine if the man himself was a Union or a Confederate soldier. And in a way, that made him the most appropriate candidate for the kind of burial those remains were then given, because he was made the nexus of a sort of ecumenical honoring of the battle. After several generations of people only wanting to acknowledge the sacrifice on one side or the other of that war, the tide had turned to mostly look at the Civil War as a tragic shattering of the nation as a whole. That October, after a period-appropriate military funeral at an Episcopal church, a horse-drawn caisson and honor guard carried the remains in a coffin to Franklin's historic Rest Haven Cemetery. Once there, they buried the coffin in a grave containing soil from every U.S. state that was home to soldiers who fought in that conflict, Northern and Southern alike. A portion of one of the original columns from the state capitol was later erected as a monument on top of the grave. Those columns were in place in the Capitol building when people stood at its steps several weeks after the Battle of Franklin to catch the sight of another fight, the one that ultimately stopped that final push of Confederates in the war's Western theater, the Battle of Nashville. Now, that war may have ended the physical battle between factions in our own nation, but we have, of course, made veterans of many more wars in the century and a half or so since. And in a few hours after I publish this podcast episode, This Is Nashville will mark the day by talking to several veterans of recent overseas conflicts. You can hear that conversation on the radio at noon And later in the day, it will be added to the This Is Nashville podcast feed. In just a few minutes, a different kind of battle entirely. One between a town and a Bitcoin mine hoping to open up shop. That's coming up after the newscast.
You've got a lot of things to keep track of. Work schedules, family activities, the ever-growing list of things you need to remember to do. Updating the credit card or banking information for your sustaining membership may have slipped your mind. With just 2 minutes of your time, you can update your payment information and check one more thing off your list. Peace of mind for you, funding for your public radio station. Go online to WPLN.org.
Here's the latest from WPLN News. A new investigation from WPLN and ProPublica has found that roughly 1 in 4 domestic violence homicide victims in Tennessee's 5 biggest cities were allegedly shot by someone who was legally barred from having a gun. Some of those victims were allegedly killed by a suspect who was also under supervision by Tennessee probation officers. Those officers are in close contact with violent, high-risk offenders and can search homes for prohibited weapons without a warrant if they have reasonable suspicion, according to the Tennessee Department of Correction. When a probationer violates a probation by committing a new crime, a warrant can go out for their arrest. But until that warrant is served, all face-to-face supervision stops. WPLN's Paige Flager and ProPublica found that sometimes that supervision gap is a few days long. Other times it lasts more than a year. 6 young black moms were killed in that supervision blind spot. Their deaths left 12 children without their mothers. You can read the full investigation now at WPLN.org. Children in state custody are continuing to sleep in offices 4 years after public outcry over the lack of placements. Tennessee records show that as recently as May of this year, the Tennessee Department of Children's Services used office space to house children in their care. Governor Bill Lee says there have been greater investments in the state foster care system, but there still aren't enough foster families. He says sometimes children need to be taken out of a dangerous situation in the middle of the night.
And if it has to happen in a DCS office because there isn't a short-term housing option available to them, then we're going to take care of them there.
DCS officials had to answer to questions about children sleeping in offices during a budget hearing last month. Before lawmakers, DCS Director Margie Quinn said that it takes time to process each placement, but that a $32 million investment from the legislature has helped keep caseloads down. Tennessee's education commissioner is undergoing treatment for cancer. The type of cancer has not been disclosed, but officials say Lizette Reynolds received an early diagnosis and continues to work through her treatment. The Tennessean reports the commissioner presented the education budget request to the governor last week and has recently testified in multiple hearings. Well, records from the immigration sting carried out in Nashville this May include very little evidence of the justification that was given for hundreds of traffic stops. The Nashville Banner reviewed just over 600 case files from the Tennessee Highway Patrol, which partnered with ICE during the raid. They found that only 14% provided a reason for the traffic stops, and most of those were minor violations such as overly dark window tint or problems with vehicle lights. The records show the traffic stops were carried out rapidly, at one point pulling over a car every 2.5 minutes. Few of those stops resulted in traffic citations. Watchdog groups say that's an indication of racial profiling. The operation took place in predominantly Hispanic neighborhoods. Most occurred in South Nashville. Federal officials have said nearly 200 people were arrested on immigration charges during the operation, but only 74 of those arrests were documented in THP's records. Information that could identify the troopers and ICE agents was redacted from all the files obtained by the Banner. Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition has sued the state, saying the files it received in a public record request were improperly redacted. The judge in that case has set a hearing to address the redactions, indicating an openness to ordering more information. About 7.5% of Tennesseans are military veterans. That's about 500,000 people. This is Nashville's Josh Deepen paid a visit to American Legion Post 82 in East Nashville to learn how veterans have assimilated back into civilian life and found community.
When veterans return home from deployment, they may not miss the tribulations of combat. But one thing that is irreplaceable, the bond you form with your brothers and sisters in arms. That certainly was true for Mark Chrissy, who served in the U.S. Army for 33 years.
When you get out of the service, you kind of lose or miss that camaraderie. You can find yourself, like I was, kind of alone, feeling disconnected, not be able to find people that can understand your perspective or your experiences.
Luckily, Mark found American Legion Post 82 in East Nashville.
Coming here replaced that and actually brought it back to me, the kind of people I connected with during my service.
Melanie Probst came to Nashville after a life change. She says the first item on her to-do list was to find a Legion post, and she hasn't stopped coming since.
People here embrace each other with such love and dignity and respect for what they've done and what they've provided for our country.
And for Emil Justin, the Legion Post provided an outlet for keeping up with his music.
This is a second home. This is a second family, extended family, and it's truly amazing. Just the heritage of music in this place alone. It's wonderful to be a part of it.
Reporting for This Is Nashville, Josh Deepen, WPLN News.
You can listen to the full Veterans Day edition of This Is Nashville today at noon or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. You'll find more news anytime at WPLN.org. The cryptocurrency industry continues to buy up land and sign energy contracts throughout rural Tennessee. They often move quickly, and by the time locals figure out what's happening, their noisy neighbor has already moved in. As WEOT's Pierce Gentry reports, some people in the town of Bulls Gap have tried to fight back.
Bulls Gap is a small community of just a few hundred people situated on rolling farmland in Hawkins County. A former market town revolving around a vital rail junction, today Bulls Gap is mostly known for its quiet farmsteads. But that quiet was disrupted for many farmers along Highway 66 when a $15 million fractionation plant opened up next door. It sells ethane products to the Holston Electric Company to produce electricity for locals. With it came a pipe towering 45 feet over the community, topped by a brilliant orange flame that produces a tremendous noise, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's a gas flare, constantly burning off excess ethane gas that isn't fit to be sold to Holston Electric. It's made life for those who live along this once quiet road difficult. Cynthia Trentham lives on a farm across the street.
Things have just been growing and changing, and it's really disrupted the whole community since it got here.
Trentham's husband, Mike, drives cattle on their farm. He says the flame isn't just loud and distracting, it bothers his animals.
But in the past, I had no trouble loading calves to take them to market. Since the flame came, I have a heck of a time getting the calves in the barn on the trailer. They are very, very, very skittish.
The Trenthams and their neighbors have had to put up blackout curtains to shield their windows from the light generated by the flare at night. Life went on this way for over a year. Then, 2 months ago, locals learned of plans to build a propane-fueled Bitcoin mine adjacent to the gas plant.
A lot of us didn't really understand. They would say, mining? Are they going to dig for something? You know, what are they doing?
Crypto mining operations rely on this type of confusion in the communities they target for development. They often look for small, rural areas with cheap land and plentiful energy, places like Bulls Gap. And they do so without asking people if they want a Bitcoin mine next door.
And people just don't want this. This is not your run-of-the-mill data center.
That's Cindy Robertson, a member of the National Coalition Against Crypto Mining, an advocacy group with a presence in 21 states.
People who live by crypto mines, they almost feel like they're losing their mind.
Kentucky-based cryptocurrency startup Exotic Ridge insists their Bitcoin mine in Bulls Gap won't be noisy or disruptive to the community. But local mother Julie Atkins, who lives across the street from the proposed development, isn't so sure.
It would be like standing next to a running motorcycle while you're trying to sleep, while you're trying to think, while you're eating, while everything. And so for a growing body and a growing mind of a child, that would be a very large concern for me.
Atkins says Exotic Ridge has made promises to the community to try and get them on board. At a county commission meeting, they claim that by buying excess ethane from the gas plant, they'll completely eliminate the obtrusive gas flare. Still, community members remain skeptical.
They wanted to sweet talk the community and say, hey, this is an issue that you guys are dealing with. Let us come in, let us harness that flame, let us use that energy and put it towards something. However, when I spoke with my neighbors, we were all in favor of the light pollution rather than the sound pollution.
Locals mobilized quickly to oppose the development, and it worked. At a September meeting of the Hawkins County Commission, a moratorium was placed on all crypto mining development. Some people have expressed doubt about the legality of such a measure, though. WUOT News tried to reach representatives of the Hawkins County government and Exotic Ridge for the story, but all declined to comment. It leaves locals worried about the future.
I hate to say this, but I'm not extremely confident that it's entirely out of the question that it will move here. I don't think it's going to happen today, but I pray that it doesn't happen even a decade from now.
In Bulls Gap, I'm Pierce Gentry, WUOT News.
We do this roundup of Nashville news every weekday, so subscribe in your favorite podcasting app to make sure you never miss an episode. And if you like this, you'll probably enjoy the Nashvillager newsletter, too. You'll get perspective from more of my colleagues at Nashville Public Radio and links to the stories we're following. Sign up for those daily emails at WPLN.org/NashVillager. Thanks so much for listening. Let's make this day a good one, and we'll catch back up tomorrow.